Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. I'm Daita Sergi, Education Programs Manager with ASHE, and I'll be the moderator today. It is my pleasure to welcome you all. As many of you know, ASHE's mission is to inspire and catalyze higher education to lead the global sustainability transformation. We're an international association with about 1,000 members spread across more than 20 countries, including Egypt and the United Kingdom. We serve as the professional home for campus sustainability staff, but we offer resources for everyone in higher education. We provide an expansive collection of online resources, networking tools, and educational events such as today's webinar, as well as an annual conference and expo which will take place October 4th to the 7th in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The call for proposals is open with a deadline of February 28th for most oral sessions, so please consider submitting for the conference. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Everyone in the audience is on mute, but please feel free to ask questions or provide comments at any point during the presentation. And I just realized that I did not share my screen, so let me do that. I was going through my slides with no screen share. Here we go. All right, so everyone in the audience is on mute, but please feel free to ask questions or provide comments at any point during the presentation via the questions pane in the control panel on your screen. If you have additional questions, please email them to education@ashe.org and we will get back to you. At the end of the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to provide feedback regarding today's presentation. We take your suggestions into account when planning for future webinars, so please do provide this feedback. Please note this webinar is being recorded. If you experience technical difficulties or have to leave early, you and others can view the recording later. The recording and presentation materials will all be available in the Campus Sustainability Hub after the live broadcast. At this time, I'd like to introduce today's webinar presenters, Eben Goodstein and David Blockstein from Bard College. Eben is an economist, author, and public educator who directs both the Center for Environmental Policy and the MBA in Sustainability at Bard College. He is known for organizing national educational initiatives on climate change, which have engaged thousands of schools and universities, civic institutions, and community organizations in solutions-driven dialogue. David is an ecologist and conservation biologist with more than 30 years of national leadership at the interface of science and environmental policy. He has worked on a wide range of science and policy issues, including climate change and energy education. Thank you so much for joining us today. And at this time, I'd like to turn things over to Eben to get us started.
Thank you very much, Data. So I will now start my slideshow and get us going. Oh. Okay.
Whoop. We need to get full screen here.
Yeah, for some reason I'm having a little challenge to get
there. There you go. Okay.
Good. Well, thank you all for joining us today. And as was suggested by the title of the conversation, we want to help you focus your campus on ambitious climate solutions in April. This is part of a project called Solve Climate by 2030. I've got a subtitle here, From Climate Despair to Local Action. And I'm going to just introduce the project, talk a little bit about the motivation, and then turn it over to David to give you some details, and then we'll move into question and answer period. I'm like all of you, inspired by Greta Thunberg, and I think that the real call for us is that we all just need to live our lives, as if the planet was on fire, because it is, and figure out how we can inspire, maybe not 4 million people, but at least 4 or 40 or 400 to get seriously engaged in thinking about and acting around climate solutions real soon, because we don't have a lot of time. So this is really the motivation for this project. The IPCC report that came out last year, that basically laid out in very stark terms that we have 10 years to aggressively cut global warming pollution if we're going to hit the low end warming target of 1.5 degrees C. And I think it's important to recognize they didn't say the world will come to an end in 2030 if we don't do that. But that window will close, and the best we'll be looking at will be 2 degrees C, and then 2.5, and then 3, and so forth. And regardless of whether we hit the target or not, obviously we need to start very deep cuts this decade in order to even achieve, a 2 degrees C. So a lot of people have come up to me since this, study came out and said, I kind of get it, but it's overwhelming. And I think for some people, this has led to climate despair because they're reading it as this is impossible, and yet this is the deadline. For other people, it's a challenge. And so there's sort of two ways to look at this. One is we only have 10 years, and the other is, well, we have 10 years. And I prefer to look at it the other way, that we can get a tremendous amount done in 10 years. But as educators, I think we really have an obligation to really engage our students seriously in the moment in which they're living. I mean, there's a lot of other things they're studying, but there's probably nothing more important for them to be aware of than the consequences of inaction or action over the next decade, and also a sense of how they can be empowered to be part of those solutions. So that's the motivation we really want to, we call it solve climate by 2030. And I've had a lot of pushback around that, like you can't really solve climate, but I think we have to think that way, right? I mean, otherwise, why are we talking about climate solutions, right? And I'll talk for a minute, in a minute, what I mean by solving climate. But the basic idea that David's going to talk about is on April 7th, 2020, we're going to have 52 hour-long university-hosted webinars on state-specific solutions, followed by community dialogues. There'll be one of these webinars in every state of the country, plus Puerto Rico and DC, plus some international sites. And so people will be able to tune in and really hear about 3 big, ambitious, but feasible things that could happen in Oklahoma or New Jersey or Minnesota in the next year or two that could really move the needle on climate change, and is something that people can directly get involved with in their states and communities. So we're trying to figure out how to get 100,000 students or more listening in to those webinars, and we'll talk about the strategy for doing that and how you can use this as a massive educational opportunity and engagement opportunity on your campus. So let me talk about the title here. What do we really mean by solving climate? Well, it means that by 2030, we would be well on our way towards a 100% renewable economy. And we just had a webinar here in New York hearing about our ambitious plans to be have built out enough offshore wind by then to be 30% of our supply, and another 30% from solar and batteries. So this is definitely possible. And we have to get our electric power from these renewable sources: solar, wind, hydro, geothermal. Batteries have emerged as a really critical piece of the 24/7 renewable system in the last couple of years. And then we also have to be transitioning rapidly towards electric vehicles. And if we can get all that done, then we've actually solved the energy half of climate change. You know, there's still air travel and cement production and deforestation, but this would be a huge chunk of the problem that's really technologically within our grasp. And so that's why we want to have this emphasis on solving climate by 2030. We mean solving the energy half. And we're not there 100%, but we're well on our way by 2030. And again, this may seem like, okay, maybe New York, because we've got our act together and we've got offshore wind resources, but really, is this possible globally to be that far along? And I think that our task right now is to help students imagine that it could be possible. And to that end, Hunter Lovins and I have written a paper about the coming energy transformation, and the possibility that the 2020s will be a decade of disruptive energy transformation driven primarily by cheap distributed batteries and solar power. So unfortunately, I did not unhook my phone before this happened. I'm just going to let it ring. So apologize for that background noise. What's really driving this is the rapid decline in solar power prices and battery prices. They've just been plummeting. And part of the reason that people have a hard time imagining this rapid energy transition is that 5 years ago, solar was expensive. 5 years ago, batteries were expensive. But both of these technologies have been falling in price at about 10% a year. And now they've crossed these technology tipping points where in many cases they're cheaper than the fossil fuel alternative. And 5 years from now, they're going to be another 40% cheaper. And they're really going to be crushing the fossil fuel infrastructure in any kind of competitive environment. We're already seeing this at the utility scale with solar, where we've had incredibly low prices for utility scale solar in Colorado and California, Idaho, 2 cents a kilowatt hour, under 2 cents a kilowatt hour. And the best that fossil fuel can do, 4.5 cents, right? So in any kind of competitive market, natural gas is history, coal is history, and solar is taking over the utility scale of power production. General Electric has gone bankrupt essentially because they can't sell natural gas turbines anymore. So this is a possibility that we're going to see solar everywhere on the planet and much sooner than most people think, particularly when we cross a threshold where rooftop solar plus batteries becomes more competitive than buying power from the grid. And that could unleash massive amounts of capital, basically installing solar on every rooftop, every farm, every roadside median, basically everywhere you could imagine it going. That's a possibility. And then if you imagine further, okay, maybe that could happen in the electricity sector, but could it happen globally in automobiles? Because they're emerging increasingly as a big part of the problem as we start to decarbonize our power sectors. And here the story would be, well, yes, if driverless electric taxis and fleets really emerge as a disruptive business model in the 2020s. And before you go, well, maybe, but not the 2020s, just recognize that this is already happening in Phoenix, Arizona. Waymo has got a business where you can, it's a commercial. You can download an app, dial up one of their vehicles, a driverless car will come pick you up, take you anywhere you want to go in the city of Phoenix, and nobody will touch the wheel. My favorite disruptive scenario comes from Tesla and the Tesla robotaxi, which is the idea that next year or maybe the year after, you'll be able to buy a Tesla for $35,000 that will make you $300,000 over a 5-year period. How would that work? Well, you plug it in at night, charge it up, you unplug it in the morning. It drives around all day by itself, picks people up, drops them off, comes home at night. You got to clean the Pepsi out of the back seat. Then you plug it back in, turn it loose again the next day, and it goes out and makes money for you. This could be here the year after next. The technology is advancing that fast. And this was an article from last week or so where somebody had put an online model of trying to figure out all the factors that would determine whether you really would make $300,000 or $150,000, depending upon what your market looks like. And just there are billions and billions and billions of dollars chasing this driverless technology. It's advancing very fast. It's one of those winner take all market opportunities. So again, this could come much quicker than people think. Tony Seba, who's modeled this out, thinks that it's going to get started for real in 2021. And he argues that it'll all be over by 2030, that by the end of the decade, Americans will be driving around in driverless vehicles and nobody will be buying cars anymore. All right, I'm sure nobody on this webinar believes what I just told you. I mean, that's just sort of mind-blowing, the idea that we could see that fast a transition in our transportation systems. But the idea is that these driverless taxis or Lyft services could be anywhere between 60 and 90% cheaper than even fueling your existing car. And that could really be an incredibly rapid driver away from personal vehicle transportation. And that we could be looking at the kind of radical transformation of our transportation systems that we saw between 1903 and 1913, when we went from 90% horses to 90% cars in about 10 years. Okay. So what we want to suggest through this project is there are reasons to believe that we could very well make an incredibly rapid transition to clean energy because we've crossed these technology tipping points. And the basic idea here is that for the last 30 or 40 years, all of climate policy at the national level has been focused on subsidizing these technologies or incentivizing them, and R&D and subsidies, and to try and drive down their costs so they get cheaper than fossil fuels, solar, batteries, electric vehicles, and it worked. It's actually a huge success story for government policy. It was the Germans and the United States and the Chinese and the Danes invested so much in these technologies that it actually worked. And now we've crossed these technology tipping points where they're cheaper than fossil alternatives, getting cheaper fast. And what that means is that local and state action is now critically important to solving climate. Because rather than trying to focus on what's happening in Washington and how discouraging that is, actually removing barriers to rapid deployment in your cities, in your states, within your electric utilities, getting them solar friendly is now probably the key to promoting and supporting this rapid energy transition in the 2020s. So part of this project is really focusing people's attention on how important it is to get your cities, your towns, your states on board with really driving this kind of rapid adoption of what will be cheaper and more efficient and more effective technologies soon, if they're not already. So this rapid global energy transition, critical for the climate, but it raises huge justice questions. I mean, if this happens as fast as I'm saying it might, then we've got to ensure there's equitable access to affordable clean power, that everybody's got access to this affordable clean mobility, that it doesn't, dismantle transit systems, that these millions of clean energy jobs are jobs for everybody. Here in New York, we were hearing about, just core construction of these giant wind turbines is going to be 10, 12,000 jobs, all kinds of subsidiary jobs associated with supply chains, manufacturing, all that stuff. But also, what about workers in declining industries? And can those clean energy jobs be jobs for everybody? And who's going to get those? So big energy questions that our students need to grapple with and be a part of as they think about the decade of the 2020s. We had a webinar on this with Michael Dorsey, who's one of our advisors to the Solve Climate by 2030 project, which is available if you wanted to kind of dig deeper into these justice questions. And this is going to be a part of all of the state level webinars, are these justice conversations. So the point here is we got to get people talking about solving climate by 2030 if we're going to have a chance of doing it. And this is really an opportunity to get people talking. And with that, David, I'm going to turn it over to you. And just please ask me to advance the slides when you need that done.
So as Eben said, the key to this is on. Whoop, we just lost your
That's because I took my video down. Sorry. Okay, my fault. I guess I can't take my video down and not share my slides. Okay.
So, while you're doing that, I'll just start talking.
Did you transfer over control to David?
All right. Let me get to where I'm supposed to be then. All right, I've got to pop up to where we are in this.
Yeah. So that was the slide I ended on, so you're good.
Yeah. So I'm just.
Go to present.
Yeah, the present button is hidden by the GoToWebinar control panel, so you have to move the control panel a little bit, and you'll see the present, and click on the arrow to choose present from current slide.
Show control panel.
Or you could just hit present there to your left a little bit.
I'm sorry, we should have.
So just move the control panel, like grab with your mouse and move it away, or click on the orange button to make it small, and then you'll see the present button. It's behind the control panel.
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it here. I think.
Well, we can move back to Eben.
Yeah, why don't you give it back to me and I'll run it. It'll be easier.
All right, sorry. So right now, people, I think just in the last couple of years are talking about climate change much more than they were, but as Eben said, a lot of the talk is really conversations that are accurately in terms of concerns about climate, but not really focused on climate solutions. And so what we are organizing and catalyzing, and what we invite every one of you to participate in, is what will be the world's largest teach-in about climate solutions and clean energy. And the magic date is April 7th at generally at 5 p.m. local time. We have arranged for nearly all of these 52 local hosts, colleges and universities that are going to organize these webinars on climate solutions, policy actions that can take place in the states. Go ahead to the next one, Eben. And so we have some hashtags because that's what we need to have these days. But so the big project is Solve Climate. We have 52 states. We don't have leads in every state, and so we're still looking for them in a few states, Delaware, Iowa. We've got a lot of leads in Puerto Rico, so I think we're going to get there, Arkansas, and a couple of others. So if you happen to be in those states and would like to help us by leading a webinar or finding somebody else who could do it, please let us know, and our contact information will be at the end of this presentation. But so we'll have one university hosting. Why don't you go to the next one, Eben? And we will start, as I say, at 5 o'clock local time with a little bit of an introduction. And then in some of these cases, these webinars are going to be live events, and which will then be webcast out. In other cases, they'll be virtual events. But in each case, we're asking them to have 3 speakers, each coming up with one big idea, but big practical idea about how do you move forward on climate solutions in each state. So for example, here in Maryland, where I live, tomorrow I'm going to be listening in at a state legislative hearing on a plan for what's called community choice energy. This happens right now it's in 8 states, and it allows municipalities to do bulk purchases of energy. And what that would do would be allow participating municipalities and like the county and city that I live in to do a bulk purchase of solar energy. And then all of us, our default option would be clean, renewable solar energy, and you would have to opt out of it, which nobody's going to do because 1, it's more expensive, and 2, it's why would you do it? So that's an example of a big policy idea. And then what we want to do is to have both at these sites and as at many sites, colleges and universities, community groups, churches, local governments, et cetera, corporations, have a follow-up discussion as to what's practical, what can we do to be involved in these ideas, how might you get your campus to be involved, how might you use this to transition your campus. So the output that we're looking for is over 100,000 participants motivated to act based on the information that we have. So our theory of change is the way that we get to 100,000 is that we ask those of you who are faculty members or academic staff who are connected with faculty members to have the faculty, and these are not just colleges and universities, but also high school, assign the power dialogue as homework, give your students extra credit or whatever for watching the webinar, and then the next day in class, talk about it. And we're going to put together templates. And again, this is a place where you can help, and I'll talk more about how you can be engaged. But so that if you're an English professor, for example, what might you do in the context of English class or philosophy? I mean, this is all about ethics, so that's a relatively easy one. But we're going to help to have some teacher guides and for that. Next, please. So that's April 7th. April 8th is what we talk about. We have many people, hundreds of classes, thousands of classes, potentially talking about climate solutions under this hashtag, make climate a class. We will encourage the webinar participants to take action, sharing what they've learned, bring friends to Earth Day climate events, because we're doing this 2 weeks before Earth Day. We all know the importance of voting, and so getting people registered to vote. We're doing this, one of the reasons for doing it in 2020. This is a totally nonpartisan effort, but we are asking people to get these solutions and then present them to your candidates and your politicians and say, what are you going to do to implement clean energy solutions? And if you don't like these ideas, what's your idea? And then, of course, a great opportunity, great learning opportunity for students and others to get involved in campaigns. I've done that a lot myself and planning to be doing that in this coming cycle. We will then, we'll collect all the state recommendations, 3 per state, and using some interns and other help that we have, we'll compile that. And so let's see, what is this national agenda? We may have 150 different items. We may have 80 different items because there'll be a lot of agreement among the states. We have a partnership with the Earth Day Network. This is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. They're helping us to market, and some of the things that we will do will be fed into the National Earth Day celebrations. As Eben mentioned, we also have a handful now of international colleges and universities that are going to be doing their own webinars. They may be a little different in the focus, whether it's policy or business actions, and we want to do many more of these. And then the final is, once we turn this, or you can already start putting your ideas and suggestions into the Q&A box, and we'll talk about this in a moment. What else should we be doing? We view this as the starting place, not the end place. Next, please. So this is directly in terms of those of you, the 50 or so of you who are participating with us on this webinar. As I mentioned, we still need hosts in a few states. Every state, every institution can host a large viewing and discussion, so that, for example, if you're at Northern Arizona University, Arizona State is going to organize a statewide webinar, but you could have something at Arizona State, or at Northern Arizona, for your students to watch and then talk, and we'll have some ideas for guides on how you might engage a productive conversation as well. We need your help to share this idea, not only to your own institution, but to other institutions, especially kind of reaching out beyond the world of higher ed. We have a website. Why don't you go to that next, Eben? We have a resource page on the website where we have various presentations, including the webinar that Eben mentioned with Dr. Michael Dorsey on climate justice. We have a link to that. And if you have good resources about climate solutions and the transition to clean energy, you can email those to us and we'll take a look at them and most likely post them on this website. Next, please. We also have a pretty cool thing. I think this may be the world's largest virtual internship. The past 2 Monday nights, even in it, I have been on this online platform with 170 mostly students, a few who are not students, but who are very eager to learn more about social media. They know a lot more about it than we do, and to share our project, to share their knowledge, their talking about media platforms that frankly I've never even heard of, and we have teams organized around different media. We have teams organized around promotion, and those of you who are working directly at college campuses, I mean, you know, just the incredible power of harnessing the talent and the energy and the passion of the student population. Why don't you go to the next one, please? So this is how you can reach us. And we would, I think at this point, probably want to turn it over to Daita to field any questions or comments that you've had. And, you know, feel free to ask both about the, or comment both on this idea that Eben talked about of this radical transformation of this, the decade of the 2020s, as well as your thoughts about the project to educate people about that transition.
Thank you so much, Eben and David. And yes, we will go to Q&A. Eben, we're still seeing your screen, so just make sure that you're showing the Q&A slide. Before we go to questions, I'd like to remind our attendees that they can submit questions for YouTube via the questions pane on the GoToWebinar control panel. We already have a good number of questions, and I'll go directed to them. So there's two types of questions. A couple were on the logistics of the Power Dialogue webinar, so I'll start with those, and then we'll get into the others who are more on general questions about solving the climate issues. So the first question was, I'd like to assign the Power Dialogue webinar to my students as an assignment in class, but can only realistically do so if it is recorded. Will they be recorded?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, each of the webinars will be recorded, and we will have links to each of them on the Solve Climate by 2030 homepage. And in fact, within a week or so, we will have a page for each state that will allow you to register to either organize your own viewing, or, you know, whether it's your university or your class, or that you're just going to view as an individual. And it will also have information about the webinar from the state, who the speakers are, who the moderator is, as well as maybe some specific resources for your state.
Yeah, I thought I might just share I'll share the website and give people a sense of that, but we can take other.
Yeah.
So here is the website. If you go to the Power Dialogue link here, this is you'll see that there's a link for every state. We have 3 live ones. So Washington, for example, if you go there, you'll see that it's going to be hosted by the Huxley College of the Environment at Western Washington. They don't have their panelists up yet, but they will soon. And then you can register actually for the event by clicking on this link here, and it'll take you to a registration page. So this is the process by which you can get attached to the program, be notified of the details. You can also, and we would welcome this actually, if you go to the Solve Climate by 2030 website itself, and just click on the sign up here to stay informed. You'll get into our main mailing list, and you'll get maybe weekly updates. We're not going to inundate people on this list with information, but we want to keep you informed about how you can help us, because we really are relying now on a very much a grassroots effort for people to take advantage of this platform, and get every teacher in the country who cares about climate change, and that's probably 90% of them, and who'd actually like to talk about this from their disciplinary perspective as a biologist or as a philosopher or as an economist or as a political scientist. We want to enable that process, give them this webinar that's very focused on what's happening in their state so the students can feel like it's relevant, and then use that as a launching pad for a conversation in the classroom.
Thank you very much for sharing that. One of our attendees, their institution will host one of these webinars. They want to know more about how to motivate participation. Do you have any suggestions locally for the institutions on how to motivate participation in the webinars?
Eben, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best way to motivate participation is to really get faculty to express buy-in. And so obviously if faculty are requiring people to go or giving extra credit for people to go, that is the best avenue. And not only because faculty are requiring it, it's just they're signaling by requiring it that it's important, and putting it on the radar screen of the students. In terms of people who aren't required to go, I always think that sort of having sort of a critical mass of faculty show up for these things is also a way to just get student engagement. And so what you might consider would be having a pre-panel for an hour ahead of time where you ask a dozen faculty members to come and each talk for 2 minutes about their thoughts about climate change. Because everybody's thinking about this. It's like everybody's thinking about this. And they don't all have to be environmental studies people. They can be just artists and historians and, you know, philosophers and religious studies people and business people. And just kind of, people are ready to talk about this. I mean, and they don't really have a forum. So creating some kind of just open forum where there's a lot of faculty and the students feel like, oh, this is interesting because people are really saying what they feel and what they believe, could be a real exciting pre-conversation to the actual policy conversation. It might be a way to, you know, gin up some interest among people who aren't required to attend.
Yeah, I would add to that in terms of just promoting your university's participation, in a few weeks, we're going to be we're going to invite you, the state leads, to ask your university communication and public relations department, or not department, but office that is responsible for promoting your college or university. We're going to ask them to come to a webinar where we will do a briefing about the project, because this is great marketing for your institution. And I remember talking with one of the state hosts, and she said, oh, well, this will be great as far as marketing, promoting our program to high school students. And so, you know, I think that that's one way to motivate, is to work with the professional people at your institution who are involved in promoting your institution and building your partnerships.
Yeah, and it might be fun to invite a high school or two to have their students come to your university to watch the webinar and help be part of the dialogue. So if you had a big auditorium, you know, that you wanted to fill, one way to fill it would be with high school students.
So a follow-up question was, do you recommend letting local newspaper know you are hosting this event?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, because again, this is not, you know, there's two issues here. One is we would urge you all to have a screening of this event if you're not the university lead. You know, like Bard is not the university lead in New York, it's SUNY Albany. University of Albany is doing it because we're up to our ears in organizing the national thing. But what that means is that here at Bard, we're going to have an auditorium, and we're going to, you know, try and get as many people into that room as having a conversation as possible. But, you know, we also want Red Hook High School to have their own, and you know, the Citizens Climate Lobby group in the town to have their own, and the faith community that's engaged in climate change locally have their own. So just helping us spread the word to other organizations to host a screening would also be super helpful, in addition to building up participation at yours.
Thank you. I think those were the questions we had so far about the webinars. Let's talk a little bit about...
There's a couple more in the chat.
Yeah, so I'm going to those now.
Oh, okay, all right.
Those are more regarding your first part of the webinar regarding the transition.
Yeah, there's actually a few about the event too. But anyway, you can ask and we'll try to respond.
Sounds good. So let's go to this one about the transition to driverless cars. Is this the solution to mass transit? Wouldn't it be better to create infrastructure that supports electric trains or buses?
This is a fascinating question about sort of how a move to driverless vehicles could impact fixed transit systems. And sort of the good story is that they solved the last mile problem. So there's a lot of people who are challenged to get from their homes to the transit stations. And so if you had very affordable driverless systems that were much cheaper than current taxis, then low-income people would be able to more effectively access mass transit. The negative scenario is that it cannibalizes the system, right? That people start taking these systems instead of mass transit. And I think that the long run story here is that you will have transit systems that are operated by cities that provide access to low income folks and communities, but there'll be pool systems that this technology is really sort of undermining the foundation of fixed point transit systems. And buses in many communities kind of lumber around half empty. So I think that what will likely happen over the long run is that city governments will just run fleets of vans that can do door-to-door delivery for people using app-based models, and that'll wind up serving low-income communities much better than what is sort of by definition kind of inefficient systems because they're fixed point systems. That would be my guess, but it's going to be a fight, and ensuring that low-income people get access to this kind of technology and options is not a done deal, and it's going to be part of what has to happen in our local communities. And I want to emphasize that I'm not like advocating that the government promote driverless vehicles. I just think it's going to happen because we got a lot of capital behind it, and it's going to be hugely profitable. So the government's role is basically going to be to control that process. I wouldn't say stop it, because I think it's going to have a lot of good things, but control it so that you're dealing with justice concerns as they emerge in this transition.
And we had one recommendation from one of our attendees. Urbanism Next and Professor Mark Schlossberg are great resources for the transit questions. Okay, so let's go to the next questions we have here. We have a couple related to how can we make change faster on our campuses. So a couple of people are revamping climate action plans and are looking for aggressive solutions, or they're interested in learning approaches to move forward and convince institutions to make change faster, or some feasible ideas for how campuses can move faster on addressing climate change that they can propose to their administration. So do you have any suggestions for these attendees who are looking for this kind of solutions?
Well, I mean, the first thing that I would say is this is an ASHE webinar, and that's what ASHE does. And so, without pandering at all, I would say that if the participants here are not members of ASHE, they should try to get their institutions to join ASHE. And if they are members of ASHE, that they should become active and come to the conference and look at the tools that ASHE has provided, and also maybe data that there may be some other webinars that you have that are directly answering this question about the transformation. But then I would also say, with respect to this event, that in the follow-up discussion, that turn the questions inward, not just about the state, but what should we be doing on our campus? And as your administration is hearing that there are thousands of people on your campus who are talking about climate solutions, I think that does ratchet up the pressure a little bit for them to also step forward.
Yeah, I think that this is not an event that's specifically focused on campus solutions, because we are actually talking about more citywide, state level, electric utility level policy ideas, although something might come up for the campuses, we don't know yet. But I think what we're doing here is providing an avenue to build the army that's going to demand that change, right? Because ultimately, you know, as sustainability directors and staff, you know, you guys are working as hard as you can within the system to, you know, engage people and do that internal leadership. But for fast change, it's got to come from the students, right? And that's who administrators listen to if students are pressuring them around these issues. So we're really trying to help get more and more students asking that question, you know, what is happening on our campus? And maybe they would organize a teach-in about that as one outcome from this conversation.
Thank you, Eben. I think your answer actually leads very well into the question about any advice for student government. What is the role that student government can play?
Yes. Yeah, so we're in order to get 100,000 students and 10,000 teachers involved in this, we're doing this kind of outreach where we're talking to staff and faculty. But we also are really calling on students to ask their teachers to assign these power dialogues as homework. So this is our hashtag Make Climate a Class campaign. We really want hundreds of thousands of students around the country over the next month or two going up to their teachers and saying, hey, on April 7th, you know, let's talk about climate, or that week. So I want you to assign this webinar for homework, and here's some resources on a web page that will help you as an English teacher, you know, talk about it with us the next day, or as a government teacher, talk about it with us the next day. So there's a really powerful role for students here, which is to take control of their education and really go talk to their teachers and say, please, this is really important to us. Let's set aside a day in class to talk about it. And, you know, the teachers are actually welcoming of that. It's not like many teachers will say yes, or they'll say, you know, maybe I'd love to, but I can't because of this and that. But no one's going to be hostile to that. And teachers really welcome that sort of engaged student involvement in their education. But that's our ask, and our social media campaign that we're running with these 170 interns, we hope will really create momentum around students asking or demanding that their teachers make climate a class.
Yeah, I would maybe even go further with that and to say, in some cases, our state leaders, our students, both undergraduates and graduates, and one thing that we hadn't really talked about yet, but is the idea that a student government could host the event on your campus as well. And in fact, one of the first people that I talked to about this project was the president of the Student Government Association at the University of Colorado Boulder, and Colorado Boulder is in fact hosting the Colorado webinar, and so I'm thinking I need to circle back with Ethan and make sure that there is that interface between their student government and the environmental studies program that's organizing their statewide webinar.
So if you're from Mississippi or Delaware or one of the other two states and you want to organize this for us, please let us know.
Great, thank you. So there's a question on campus chapter program that engages students on climate and has also career leadership development opportunities. Do you have any suggestions of some leadership opportunities for their program?
Well, I have a great one. I run leadership training workshops for people who aspire to careers in sustainable business, policy, politics, NGOs. And we run these once every semester, typically the first weekend in December and the first weekend in March. It's called the C2C Fellows Program. And they're just a great weekend workshop that focuses on very concrete skills about both leading change and also building your career in the space. So if there's interest in that, you can always send your members or some of your members for trainings, and then they can bring those trainings back to your organization and do similar sorts of trainings. I can do those trainings too if it's something you're interested in for your groups. Our program is called the C2C Fellows Program, like the letter C, the number 2, the letter C Fellows. And if you go to the, just type that in with BARD, it'll pop up. Our next workshop is March 6th through 8th, so it's coming up fast. It's only $30. If you can get here, we'll put you up and feed you for that. And BARD is very easily accessible by train from New York City. So if you can get to New York City, and a lot of people come here by getting their student governments to, you know, fund them for a plane fare and a train ticket up to us. So it's something that you don't necessarily have to pay for out of your pocket.
Yeah, my son did it a couple years ago and had a great experience. Also, in terms of the idea of universities working together, I spent most of my career with the National Council for Science and the Environment and helped to organize a state or a national organization of climate or of environmental education leaders, a Council of Environmental Deans and Directors, and that's changed a little bit. But we also did work with some states. For example, we helped in Alabama to build a Alabama Environmental Education Coalition, and it had a we had an inaugural conference, had people from most of the universities in Alabama, and one of the things that they did was they pooled together money, and they actually had some corporate sponsorship for a coordinator for that. And so I'd be happy to talk to people off. We're losing the audio here.
Are you back, David?
Okay. I'd be happy to talk to people offline about how to better organize campuses within your state and nationally.
Yeah, and I think that was the question on thinking about coordinating efforts with other universities within the same state and how they can partner to move the needle faster. Okay, let's see. There's also some questions about K-12 participation. In addition to having a screening of the webinar, do you have any specific recommendation for, you know, school students, K-12 students?
I think that this program is very suitable for kind of advanced middle school students, because there's a lot of young middle school students who are really active in the youth climate movement, and certainly for juniors and seniors in high school. We're particularly targeting AP Environmental Studies classes, but any teachers that are, you know, engaged around government or civics or policy or environment would be, you know, I think it'd be a great option for their students. More generally, a colleague of David's and mine runs a thing called Young Voices for the Planet. She's a videographer, and we have one of her videos on our website that features 3 11-year-olds who got their city government. They went and testified in favor of their city government putting solar on their school roof, and it passed, and just really impressive young people. And so it's a great video. I think it's really inspiring for middle schoolers to watch that.
Yeah, I would also suggest working with professional associations that have chapters in your state. If you're coming from the sciences, every state has a state academy of sciences that are primarily people involved in K-12 education, and most of them are very eager to build partnerships with higher education. They're also disciplinary professional associations, for example, the National Earth Science Teachers Association that has a pretty active state chapter program, and that has also been working with us in helping to raise awareness about this project.
Thank you. We have maybe 1 or 2 questions left so far. So if there's more questions, we still have 5 minutes in this webinar. So please make sure you submit them now. This is a question I think that comes back to the discussion you had about driverless cars. But you know, how does innovations address the issue of greenwash technology, and how can we make sure we incorporate circular economy principles, so minimizing the waste and in technology innovation?
Yeah. I mean, this is a big question. You know, we talked today, like again at lunch, around New York State's initiative to, you know, install 10 gigawatts of wind power, which is about 6 nuclear power plants worth of wind. That's a huge industrial project. There's going to be lots of, it's a lot of mining, it's a lot of manufacturing, it's a lot of pollution. And I don't think we can fool ourselves that you know, a transition to a clean energy economy is somehow going to be pollution free. And in particular, if we were to rewire the world with solar and batteries over the next 10 years, again, that's a huge industrial project. The good thing, though, is that you're moving towards a system that is more circular. Sort of by nature, renewable energy provides that. Batteries are kind of inherently a circular technology because they contain valuable metals, and recycling is going to be the logical way to deal with those. So I think it's a good move, broadly speaking, to make this transition to a clean energy future from the point of view of moving towards a more circular economy. But that's, you know, obviously a longer run project, and it's the heart of what we do at the BARD MBA and Sustainability Program. We actually are the only MBA program in the world, as far as I know, that has a track and a focus on circular economy business models in our program. But yeah, I mean, that's the only way we're going to make it through the 21st century, right? Is that, as Paul Hawkins said, you know, business systems ultimately have to mimic natural systems, and ultimately has to be actually not that long, not that distant in the future. So, you know, definitely that's got to be part of everybody's thinking as we do rewire the world in a clean energy space.
Okay, sounds good. Hopefully that's what we're gonna do. And I know there's a lot of discussion also on the business side on sustainable procurement and the circular economy. So there's some webinars at ASHI that we're gonna have on that topic as well. We're at the end of our questions, so I'll let you have the final comments before I conclude today's webinar. So if there's anything else you'd like to share before we go, we end the webinar.
Leda, thank you so much for having us, and thank you all for the work you're doing. You know, it's a challenging time out there on lots of dimensions. And sometimes it's hard to wake up in the morning, frankly. But, you know, I think all of us kind of recognize also the privilege of being alive at this extraordinary moment in human history, because we can so clearly see two futures, and one is pretty dark, right? But we also can clearly see a sustainable future, and we know how to get there. It takes a lot of hard work. And specifically in this case, we're creating a very kind of easy platform for people to engage lots and lots of people in the conversation, an easy and fun platform. So please, please host one of these events on your college campus or your high school campus. Please tell every teacher you know to make climate a class, hashtag make climate a class. Follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter. Let's really get that idea of hashtag making climate a class out there in the world, so that students are empowered to ensure that that's happening, that they are getting a real discussion of real issues in their classrooms in this sort of critical moment. David?
I think you said it all. Just thank you for all of you for your great work, and thank you for joining us today. And please join us in this movement that we're a part of, as are you.
Thank you very much, Eben and David. Before we conclude, I just want to mention our next two webinars. The next week we'll cover University of California, Irvine's experience with more than a decade in pursuit of carbon neutrality. So it's experience of some pleasant surprises, some setbacks, and many lessons learned. And then on February 26th, we'll have a webinar introducing ways for colleges and universities to integrate social equity and environmental internally and programmatically. So you can learn more about these webinars and all of our other professional development offerings on our website, or by subscribing to ASHI's newsletter. And I hope you'll join us again. A couple of attendees asked about the recording of today's webinar that will be available tomorrow together with the slides, and you'll receive a notification once they're uploaded. Thank you very much and have a great day. Oh,
And thank you, Daita.
Bye-bye. Yeah, thank you very much.
bye.
Bye-bye.